Many thanks for the introduction. I'm presenting this on behalf of my co-authors, Valentin, Niklas, Romina, and especially Valentin, who can't be here today because he's giving a talk at this very moment in another location. So this talk is about social acceptability. And, well, there are many devices where we think, oh, they are socially acceptable. But that's not true for all devices. So about 2 years ago, we went out and did kind of a fun project. We thought about, what about VR glasses? They are the next big thing. How socially acceptable are they? So if they are supposed to replace smartphones in the future, they should be as socially acceptable, right? So we did this study. And we basically took photos and then we did an online survey. But while doing that, we figured out that we didn't really know how to assess social acceptability. So we, of course, looked into the literature, and at that point, what we found was work by Profita and colleagues, and they came up with their own questionnaire to assess social acceptability, and we are grateful to them because we later adapted that ourselves and used it. But what's interesting about this work is also that they found that social acceptability, of course, depends on the device, but it also depends on the user wearing the device. So if in this case, if you have a user with a disability, then this makes the device more socially acceptable, right? Which is strange because isn't it about the device? And shouldn't it be more about the device than about the user? If you look further at the previous work, so what we needed back then was a quantitative scale to assess social acceptability that now exists. So Kelly and Gilbert, they developed one. And you can use that, and this is nice because it puts, there's one single unified scale that measures social acceptability. And that's beautiful, so if you have a device and you want to figure out, oh, is this socially acceptable, you can use this scale. So what we, from recent work on social acceptance, we know that social acceptance is an important factor for the adoption of devices. So if it's not socially acceptable, you will not adopt it. Kelly and Gilbert, they provide a scale to quantitatively assess social acceptability so that you get a single value out of it. But Profita and colleagues showed that social acceptance depends on the user using it. So how could that be? You have a single score, but then the user also affects it. So that leads us to two questions that we had. One is, how do users affect the social acceptance? So what is their effect, and how can we explain social acceptance? So if you just have one score, what does it mean, right? Where does it come from? So we looked back into the literature, and then we looked into social psychology, and what you find in social psychology is what's called the stereotype content model. And that's an established model from social psychology, and it is used to explain stereotyping in humans. The model has been used to explain things like racism and other isms. So this is quite interesting, and it puts human stereotypes into this two-dimensional grid along 2 dimensions. One is competence. You are competent if you are able to act according to your intention, and you're warm if you are supposed to help me. And you're cold if I fight with you for the same resources. And this is from a study by Fiske and colleagues from 2002, so keep that in mind. They did a study, and then they took human stereotypes and they put them into this two-dimensional grid. So they did a study, and then they asked people to assess that. That's, of course, cultural specific, right? And also time specific. So if you would do that and they did that in other countries, it would look different. But what you can do across cultures is you can identify these different regions. And If you look at the grid in the upper right, that's where you want to be, right? That's high status, very competent. These are your friends. They're also competent. That's where you want to be. If you look at the lower left, that is cold and not competent. That's where you don't want to be. And what we believe, and we're pretty certain about that, but what we believe, and for the rest of the talk, I'll try to make you believe that as well. What we believe is that this is social acceptance. Okay, so what does that have in common with HCI? Well, what we were interested in, how do mobile devices affect stereotypes' position within the stereotype content model? So we had the stereotypes, but what happens if we give them a mobile device? So that's what we did then in the study. So we took 8 well-known stereotypes from previous work. We went on stock image websites, and then we retrieved the images for them. So these are the 8 categories. And then we took 8 mobile devices, and we tried to take a broad sample. So there are some devices that make more sense than others. So there's the LED glasses. You can buy them on Amazon. Don't make any sense, but yeah, that's a mobile device. And then we paired them. And we constructed a questionnaire that basically looks like this. In this case is, as viewed by society, how competent, for example, are homeless people with blood pressure monitors. And then we conduct a study. So we conducted a study with about more than 70 computer science students. So you have to keep that in mind for the rest of the talk. This is the opinion of German computer science students. Right? Okay, so we took that. You see there, that's quite a lengthy one, so we invited them to our lab, and then they filled these questionnaires in all combinations, also without the device. So we also had this only with the human stereotype, without a mobile device, so that we know where is their position in the stereotype content model if they don't have a device. Okay, and that is the results, the position of the human stereotypes within the stereotype content model as rated by computer scientists from Germany. And this is kind of expected. So this is what you would expect also from previous work. The positions are fairly similar and not very surprising. And then we paired them with these mobile devices. And this is an example. This is a narrative clip. It takes an image every 30 seconds, so a photo. And then we paired that with the human stereotypes and we looked at how does it change their position. And this is how if we pair, I don't know, a physician with a narrative clip, then his position goes into to the end point of this vector. Same thing for singles, environmentalists, senior citizens, right? And it's always the original position and the end point is then the vector. And then we can compute the average, and this is here. So that's the average position of the endpoint, and what we assume is this is basically the position of the narrative clip without a human stereotype. Of course, we not only did that for one device, we did that for all devices, and it might be hard to see, but basically it's fairly systematic where these human stereotypes are dragged when we give them additional mobile devices. Okay, so what did we find from that systematic attraction, which suggests that the devices have their own position in the stereotype content model? What we also found, not every stereotype works the same way, so there's especially for senior citizens, it's kind of different, and we believe that there's an additional underlying factor that influences that. But our assumption from the first study is that the stereotype content model can be applied to objects and abstract constructs. And that makes us wonder, are mobile devices indeed stereotypically perceived? So we did another study. We recruited new mobile devices. So we took the 8 initial mobile devices and we added 8 more, so things like the hearing aid, smart glasses, fitness trackers. And then we conducted another study where we paired these mobile devices, so the full 16 mobile devices, with any person. So we didn't give participants a specific stereotype, but we just told them, as viewed by society, how competent is any person with these mobile devices. Okay, so we This is still the result from the first study, narrative clip and the average position, and now we also have the results from the second study, where we can draw that also in the stereotype content model, and this is the position of any person using a narrative clip. And what you see, this is the average position and the confidence interval, and you see it almost fits that position. And that's not only true for the narrative clip, of course, but that's basically true for all the 8 devices from the initial study, where we can see their position from the first study and also position from the second study, and they're very close to each other. So what we conclude is the average stereotype using the device is basically the same as any person using the device, and that makes us pretty certain that this is actually the position of the device within the stereotype content model. Okay, so we also did some quantitative analysis of that. So we tried to answer the question, are devices used by any person close to the location predicted by the first study? And indeed, we find very high correlations between that, and they're also significant. So it's basically there is a connection between the average position of the human stereotypes that we predicted and the position when we asked them about any person. And we also have a linear model which can be utilized to determine the location of the stereotypes, devices, and user-device combinations within the stereotype content model if you provide some information about it. Finally, we also have, because we asked that, for all the 16 mobile devices, we have their position within the stereotype content model. But for this one, again, you have to keep in mind, this is the opinion of humans that study computer science at the University of Stuttgart. So it's not the average human being, not even the average German, right? And that has some implications. But what did we learn from that? Stereotypes, warmth, and competence are systematically shifts when combined with mobile devices. So if we give a human stereotype a mobile device, then it shifts their position. Mobile devices are thus stereotypically perceived themselves. There are some effects that we cannot really explain with this model, especially the results for senior citizens suggest that there are underlying factors that we don't quite understand, and that might be related to the sample that we took by asking German computer science students, because they're all young, so they come from a very different group of people. So we asked participants that, they have a background in technology, and we did that intentionally to ensure that all participants have a consistent understanding of their devices, but that clearly for a lot of these devices reflects an in-group perspective, so they use most of the devices. And that might be different from the average population that probably did not use these devices. So we assume that there are effects by in-group and out-group, and there are differences just because participants never use these devices. For others, they use these devices, and there might be differences, and we believe that this is interesting to investigate. One thing I claimed in the beginning of the talk is that, this is basically social acceptance, but through the work that I present today, we cannot prove that, right? We luckily did follow-up work, so we are now pretty certain that this is actually the case because we paired it with an existing social acceptance questionnaire, and then we find strong correlations, but just looking at this paper, we actually cannot show that. So what could you get from that? I think the first thing that you could get from that is buy a Kindle, right? Or any other e-reader. That's a good thing. That's basically, if you're an academic, that's the only device that this does not make you less socially acceptable. So I own a Kindle. But I think any e-reader would work. Academics, by the way, are traditionally also where the physicians are. So we are very warm and very competent. That's nice. Okay, what else can we learn from that? Mobile devices have a position within the stereotype content model. assumed users systematically change devices' social acceptance. So if you do a study on social acceptability and you don't want to use the stereotype content model or anything like that, but a standardized questionnaire, you still have to control who is using these devices. If you ask participants, they might assume a certain type of users, and that will then be factored into the results. So you should control that. You should probably tell participants, assume that this kind of person is using the device. Or you should explicitly tell them any person using this device. You should do something, because if you don't control that, you get things factored in that you're not interested in. Well, in general, we believe that more research is needed to understand which dimensions correlate or deviate with the stereotype content model. And with that said, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nils. Questions, please come up to our student volunteer here. And then Andrew is going out with index cards for anyone who are unable to get up and come to the front.
Thank you very much, Niels. Very nice work. Nicola Marsen from Heilbronn University in Germany also. And I was wondering, I have worked with the stereotype content model and with gender. And of course, when we're looking at the things that you have, not only knowing the population of students at Stuttgart University, but also the target groups here that you have, we know that for like career men and women, they very much contrast away from each other. Have you started looking at that, or is that still on the list?
So thank you for the question. So the question was about did we look at gender? So one thing that we intentionally did, because we did not want to look at gender, was we had these stereotypes that we came up with, the human stereotypes. We always had a male and female picture, so that we don't assume any gender. Later on, so there are two studies, and for both of them we looked at are there gender differences in the results that participants gave us, and the results look very similar, and the effects are not significant, so we did not find significant effects of like the gender of the participants. I think one thing that's important to note, for our work, it doesn't matter if our sample is biased, because it's not about the actual position of these things in stereotype content model. It's about do we find the general effect? And that's similar to the original work about the stereotype content model. What Fiske and colleagues did, they explicitly went to different countries to look at people with different biases to see, does it still work? Does it work in Korea? Does it work in Europe? And then people have different biases, and they have different stereotypes, but the mechanism are always the same. So what I assume is that if you go for other students or senior citizens or whatever, you will find the same mechanism, but certainly not the same position in the stereotype content model.
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Hi, Niels. Thanks for the talk. Anjan from Stanford University. I was a little confused by your conclusion about the e-reader and Kindle. I was wondering if you clarified that. And as a follow-up to that, I'm wondering if e-readers or Kindle had that effect because it looks so paper-like and analog, or is it something to do with the fact it's so limited and constrained and it's not connected to the internet and so on and so on?
The question was about the Kindle. So in the study we asked people about e-readers, right? It's not necessarily a Kindle, but the Kindle is probably the most prominent e-reader, and that was clearly the warmest and the most competent device. So if you want to appear warm and competent, that's the device to go with. So that's at least if you want to appeal to German computer scientist students.
Do you have any theories of why that's the case? Is it because it looks like paper? Is it because it signals something?
No, I think it's because it's a single-purpose. So that's my assumption. So I think it's a single-purpose device. You exactly know what people are doing that, and they're reading, and reading is connected to competence. So you're reading, and that makes you competent. And you're not threatening me because you're reading. That's not an activity. You don't post any any images of me on Facebook or anything. You cannot do threatening things with e-readers, and you cannot do much more than reading, which is a sign of being competent. So I think these two things combined make e-readers warm and competent. But that's just my interpretation.
Okay, we have to finish it now and continue the discussion offline.